convention. It's really great to be hosting this here at Greenwich, the University of Greenwich. This being the centre of time as well, you know, kind of in an arbitrary sense, and because it's also the kind of the centre of the British Empire in a way, because this is where the kind of naval fleet was developed and all the rest of it, and Queen Elizabeth I was born, and kind of empire was born from there. So this is kind of the arbitrary place in which they kind of stationed the first, well, the centre of time, if you like. So I thought it was only fitting we should have a symposium on psychedelics and altered states and time, and well, space-time. You can't have time without space-time. So I'll have a number of speakers come to talk about that. It's very difficult to find speakers to come to this, not because it's a bad event or I'm a nasty person or anything like that, but largely because there isn't very much research being done on psychedelics and time, or altered states for that matter. So we have about, with us today, the kind of, possibly you could say the experts of what we know about this at this moment in time, well, apart from myself, because I'm speaking first. So I take my host hat off, and so I'll introduce the first speaker, Dr. David Luke. Well, I'm the host here, and I work at this university. And I just want to start off, because it's a very early time as well to be in here, particularly if you went to the after party last night. So I just thought I'd start off with a bit of adventure time.
Don't worry, I have everything under control. Under control? Yes, I'm terrified. Yes, and the brain's releasing adrenaline. Told me, even chemical should be from a pineal gland. Please get serious.
Okay. They are releasing dimethyltryptamine from their pineal gland. That's it. It's official now, because it's on the cartoon. So, well, I'm going to have to whiz through this because I already started a little bit late. And so I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour. Okay, that's the wrong slide. And let's try it again. Okay, who's keeping me to time actually? Because I'm in the chair. Ah, then I can just ramble on. That's fantastic. Okay. So this is a talk called "It's a Poor Sort of Memory That Only Works Backwards." And does anybody know where that line comes from?
Through the looking glass.
Through the looking glass, yes. In fact, Analysis talking to the White Queen, and I've forgotten what the White Queen actually says. Do you remember the quote? I'm not very well prepared, largely because I've been organising this event. But so Alice is saying to the Queen, "Oh, yes, I'd like to have jam the day before and every day before and every day after." And she goes, "How can you have jam the day before?" He says, "Well, you know, because my memory goes backwards." And she goes, "Well, I can never remember things until they've actually happened." And the Queen says, "Well, it's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards." So is there a sense in which maybe our perception of time and experience can go both ways? And I'm going to look into that. I'm looking into the psychology of that, and primarily the parapsychology of that. I'm a parapsychologist. So is it possible to perceive things from the future? And this is the kind of work of my research in precognition. Also could be known as presentiment or prescience. I'm pressing the wrong button. Okay, so the history of this, the history of seeing forwards in time, can be seen to go back to the oracles of Delphi and their use of psychoactive substances, it's thought, such as the Pythia here, who are divining and prophesying the future. This is King Croesus in ancient Greece, and it's thought that they use perhaps psychoactive gases emanating up from the rock fissures, or perhaps even psychoactive plants, such as henbane, which was known as Pythonian back in the day. It was actually known as English tobacco once upon a time, kind of medieval times, which must have been a good time in history. We also see other plants used throughout the old world, such as mandrake. It's also thought to have divinatory powers as well. Traditionally, it's mentioned in the Bible. Its Northern European name is Alraun, and forgive my German, it's very bad pronunciation, which kind of shares in common the name of the divinatory seeresses who see into the future, the Alruna, which both take their name from runes, which was a divinatory letter system before it became a kind of alphabet. But not just in the old world here, but all over the world, in fact, we find people who have engaged in acts of perceiving into the future through the use of psychoactive plants, psychoactive substances, and we call these people shamans, usually, although that's a kind of very generic term for actually a very specific group of people. But we find in every culture across the world, people who use psychoactive plants, psychedelic plants particularly, for looking into the future, transcending space and time, such as the Recreational Indians or Radica, who are also here today representing, actually in a different session later on this morning, who use a psychoactive peyote cactus. We have historically Maria Sabina and the Maztec Indians have used mushrooms. In Siberia, the Tungus use fly agaric amanita. In India, for instance, you have the use of perhaps datura, or that's probably not datura is smoking. The use of patchouli by the indigenous people of Australia. Iboga in Africa, I'm just going to go on like this all day. The use of perhaps pecan and hamala in central, in the Middle East and North Africa. And of course in South America, we have a veritable cornucopia of psychoactive plants being used for transcending space and time, such as ayahuasca here used by the Shuar. But it wasn't just, traditional users of these plants have known about this for thousands of years, have used them for these purposes. And it wasn't until relatively recently that Western explorers and scientists and researchers started discovering these things. And of course, on first discovering them, they also encountered these so-called apparent kind of glimpses into the future, such as Gordon Wasson, seen here with his wife Valentina. And when they first discovered the use of psilocybin mushrooms in the Maztec Mexican indigenous people, they found this man and he did a mushroom ceremony for them. He's called Don Arulio. And he took the mushrooms and he just told Gordon Wasson two things about his son back home in the US that certainly Gordon Wasson didn't know about, and certainly Don Arulio shouldn't have known about. And one of them was true at that time, but Wasson didn't know, and one of them came true. So a kind of apparent demonstration of precognition with the first discovery of psilocybin mushrooms. They haven't always been used in kind of by researchers and explorers, of course. We have recreational use of psychoactive plants and substances. They've also been used in therapy as well, of course, but I'm not going to talk about that. But recreationally, if we were to do a kind of a survey, I'm sure if I was to do a survey here of people who've used them and had experiences of a kind of anomalous nature, there'd be rather a lot. I'm not going to ask you. But other research surveys have found that, for instance, with the use of cannabis, we find that telepathy is the most apparent kind of anomalous experience that people report having. I'm not saying it's definitely true, but 83% of people using cannabis have had an experience of telepathy under the influence of cannabis, whereas only 32%, about a third of people, suggest they've had some kind of instance of transcending time and seeing into the future, and less so for psychokinesis. Other surveys have reported much the same. But it's not just the fact that people who use these substances may also have a tendency towards having those kind of experiences, because this survey shows that people who use them more have more experiences. So they seem to be more intimate related. So this survey by Kjeldren and Norlander, I can't pronounce that, found that high incidence of telepathy and travelling clairvoyance, although no report of precognition in this case, i.e. seeing into the future. And also back to some of my own research. I have actually done some of my own research on this as well, and did a survey and found very similar things. Only as little as 21% of people reported having experiences of precognition among psychedelic users. But that's a fairly high incidence. Now you may ask, well, people using non-psychedelic drugs, do they also report having these kind of experiences as well? And so I did a comparison with non-psychedelic substances, other drugs like alcohol, prescription drugs, and also cocaine and heroin. And the report of these kind of experiences was as little as 2%, actually under the influence of those drugs. So we only really find these kind of experiences occurring with psychedelics. Now you may think that, well, that's just survey, that's just people self-report. Obviously we can't believe everything they say. They may be kind of genuine and meaningful and being honest, but it could be some amount of self-deception or misperception or, some kind of cognitive distortion, which leads them to think that they've had an experience of seeing into the future. But it is important to find out what experiences people have had and start from there. And people generally do have these experiences. But then we have to kind of progress to the next step and conduct experimental research. And there was a number of experiments actually done, largely in the 60s and the 70s, looking into the incidence of extrasensory perception, telepathy, clairvoyance and precognition using psychedelic substances. Even among some of the great legends of psychedelic research, such as Walter Pankey, who you probably know from the Good Friday experiments, conducted an experiment looking into telepathy with LSD. I was going to tell you very briefly about some of those experiments. There's two types of kind of basic types of parapsychology. ESP experiments we can do. You probably recognise these, the Zener cards, the classic card guessing tasks, where you kind of sit there with a pack of 25 cards and there's 5 different symbols spread throughout, and then somebody in the other room perhaps has to try and guess what each card is in turn. And they do that over and over again, often very repetitive, but very basic and very simple. Obviously it got a bit technologised as time went on, and this is not very recently, this is kind of 60s I think, or 70s perhaps. I'm guessing 70s by the kind of colour. And there was various experiments. So you get the idea of these kind of Zener cards, but they're kind of repetitive guessing tasks. And you've got five possible choices of what the actual so-called target might be that person is perhaps selecting in the future. And there was a number of experiments done looking into those, primarily only using psychedelics, but only looking at telepathy mostly and clairvoyance. So these are a number of experiments were conducted, and this is what we call the forced choice design. So you're forced to make a choice between wavy line, star, circle, square, and all these experiments were conducted, and none of them really worked. They didn't find any good evidence to suggest that there was any kind of clairvoyance or telepathy. However, they did conduct, in some cases, for several hours. They'd have people sat there for 3 or 4 hours guessing card after card after card after card after card. They never had any control conditions to see if people could actually perform well anyway in those kind of conditions. Most of the participants were naive, they'd never taken psychedelics. So this was their first ever psychedelic experience, and you sat there and made to guess card after card after card. And of course the people said, this is psychedelically immoral, and other people saying, well, they just wanted to enjoy the visions. And of course a lot of people got extremely bored as well, those kind of antics. But fortunately there was a kind of an alternative design, that was kind of rather back in the history of parapsychology, and we use more dynamic measures of trying to see if people are picking up on some distant or distant in time target. So you perhaps use a picture or a video even, and you allow the person to make a free response. They just kind of say, okay, I'm seeing somebody coming up the stairs with a cup of coffee for me, that kind of thing. It's not worked. Maybe if somebody comes in with a cup of coffee, that'd be great. So there's a more of a free response, and then you match those to a specific number of targets. So you have then four possible targets, and then you match those based on the free response, and one of those is the target that the person was supposed to select. So this is a bit more of an open way of testing for this kind of thing. There was a number of those experiments conducted, and over the years, I won't go into all the details of them, but you'll see that nobody looked at precognition. They looked at clairvoyance, i.e. seeing across great distances, and they looked at telepathy, but nobody looked at precognition. But what we did find in those experiments they were largely successful. The majority of these experiments seem to suggest some evidence that they had actually identified the apparent target. They weren't particularly well controlled, so we can't make any conclusive thoughts on those, but I think it at least is promising of kind of further research, but I won't go into the details. So this led me to try and do some of my own experiments. Right, just to remind myself. It's not easy doing two jobs. Okay, very quickly then, I tried first of all doing some experiments with ayahuasca. I don't need to tell you what ayahuasca is. It's usually a combination of two plants, one of which usually contains DMT, dimethyltryptamine, exuding from your pineal, apparently, according to Adventure Time cartoon, and perhaps something like the ayahuasca vine, which contains harmonic alkaloids such as harmine and harmine. And harmine, when it was first isolated about 100 years ago, was actually called telepathy because so many people reported having, well, actually, not telepathic, but more kind of clairvoyant-like experiences. So I thought this would be a good substance to do research in. I tried to develop a kind of field experiment, so a kind of field parapsychology experiment. With repeat measures, so before and after design. I also had a matched control group and 20 participants per group. And so I used people who are already in an ayahuasca ceremony. I didn't kind of go into the ceremony and get people to do it, just like, so I test them before and then I test them after the ceremony whilst they were still feeling the effects of the ayahuasca, which isn't ideal, but I also asked them then, I took it from the time they were dosed, and I also asked them how much of an altered state they were in still. So I had this precognition design, and they had to try and visualize certain images, these kind of fractal images. So I get them to close their eyes and try and visualize a fractal image, and then which, you know, psychedelic visions are kind of somewhat geometric, perhaps fractal, not quite fractal, but geometric at least. And so they'd open their eyes and then they'd try and pick one of the four images and they'd say which one was most like the thing they were seeing with their eyes closed, with the intention of trying to see into the future and then work out which one the computer is going to select out of those four. And then we have a kind of very controlled probabilistic determination of whether or not they can actually second guess what the computer is going to do with their visualization techniques. So we would expect that, you know, if you just randomly choose 1 in 4 images, that you would get a 1 in 4 chance of success. You would get a 25% chance of success of guessing which one of these images is going to come up, is going to be chosen by the computer in a random fashion in the future. Okay? So it's a very secure design. Your choice and the computer's choice should be completely independent and arbitrary. There should be no way you should be able to guess what the computer is going to do. I thought it was a good design, but it didn't work. The long and short of it, I'm going to tell you the results, but there was actually a decline effect after the use of ayahuasca, but there was also a decline effect in the baseline, in the control group as well. So it could be a fatigue effect, you know, people are just not performing well on this kind of task. There's obviously other problems as well. People are in a rather different state of mind when they're doing an ayahuasca ceremony. They don't really want to kind of sit there on a laptop and do your weird experiment. So, you know, people are kind of rather somewhere else. But I gave it a go, and I wasn't totally put off because I thought there were some flaws with this design. For one thing, those fractal images are all rather similar, so it's not very easy to actually distinguish between them anyway. It's not a very easy task, even if you're not high on ayahuasca. So, I'm not going into the details to them. Not yet. Okay. I didn't really need a chair. Can I chair myself? I don't think so. Okay, so. There were a few kind of correlates. Time to dosing could have been a factor. Time from dosing. People who were closer in time to their dosing time, actually dosing when they drank the sacrament, they performed better, but that wasn't significant, and perhaps the depths of the altered state of consciousness as they were in as well had some factor, because people who were in a greater altered state actually performed a little bit better. But this needs replicating. It took me about 3 years to get all the data in the first place, so I'd be delighted if somebody else were to replicate this. So I tried to improve the design. That was a bit of a forced choice kind of design. It wasn't really ideal. Fractal images all look very similar. So I thought I'd move to more of a free response kind of setup. And also the situation is quite difficult. You know, we've got the demands of the altered state and the setting and all the rest of it. And also, because I was doing this research, this kind of field experiment, I was also obliged to take part and drink a little bit of the ayahuasca as well, for the people to let me take part. Which doesn't really help, I mean, even just a tiny bit, because it didn't help me, because I don't get on very well with ayahuasca. So I thought there's got to be a different way of doing this and a different substance to use. So whilst I was in South America, also we know of other substances which are quite useful, such as San Pedro cactus. This has been known throughout history to being used for these kind of psychic purposes. So for instance, there's a great ethnographic text called Eduardo el Curundero, and Eduardo talks about it induces this sixth sense, the telepathic sense of transmitting oneself across time and matter. It's a very great book, well worth a read. And so I chose to look at San Pedro, which contains mescaline. There have been previous studies done looking at the use of mescaline in ESP, such as Rouillet, John Smithers, who worked with Humphrey Osmond. Osmond himself did some telepathy experiments with Duncan Blewett. And they all, on the whole, reported some interesting findings, but none of these were actually looking specifically at precognition. They're largely kind of clairvoyant or telepathy. So no one's really done this. And I went to Ecuador to try and do this research, and I tried to find people to take part in the experiment, but I was having rather a difficult time getting people to want to do this kind of experiment in a ceremony. You know, field research it's not so easy to do. I had planned to get 20 participants to take part in my experiment, but in the end I only found one. So I thought, well, instead of having 20 participants do the experiment, do one trial each, I'll have one participant do all 20 trials. And of course, that was me. So, I'm very familiar with it. I've done a lot of the experimental design, so I'm very familiar with it. And I gave myself just enough of a dose of San Pedro, I thought, so I could have much more visual mental imagery, but still function enough to run my own experiment, which I just about got right. So I did 20 trials on myself. I have each trial to start off with a visualization process, where I try and visualize what the target was. This time, the target was a video clip, a 1-minute video clip. Then I'd have a viewing session. I'd write down what my visualization was first. I'd do my visualization of what I thought the video clip was going to be. And then I'd write down my visualization. And then I would view 4 randomly prepared 1-minute video clips. So 4 video clips I hadn't seen before. They're all designed to be as kind of different from each other as possible, and they're all 1 minute long, and with some kind of emotional content. And these have been prepared by a researcher for me. And there was 20 pools of these kind of clips. So I'd do my visualization, write it down, I'd watch the 4 clips in that pool, and I would rank them. I'd say which one was most like my visualization. And then, once I'd done that, my voting, I would then run a randomizer, a random number generator, a proper random number generator, not a pseudo one, a true random number generator, and it would select the target for me. So after I've made my decision, I've written it down, it's all written down on paper, which of these 4 clips is most like my visualization. I would then run a randomization. So it's an event in the future. There's no way I can second guess what a randomizer is going to throw out. And so I did 20 trials of that, which took me about 8 hours. It was quite grueling, but worth it in the name of science, I think. I won't talk about the correlates, but I'll give you some. I'll just give you a couple of quick. Right, okay, I'll give you a couple of quick. Hang on a minute. I'm not having enough time to do this, actually, so. I'm going to describe it to you instead. You have to use a bit of your own kind of mental imagery and visualization and imagination here. So this is what I wrote down. This is the first one I did. This is the time. Rotating like a helicopter blades, space, more mechanical stuff, spacecraft, space skeletons, water, a submarine, a big rig, but underwater. So that would seem to be enough. You know, I figured two or three kind of bits of imagery would be enough. Obviously, you just want to have. There's only going to be one video clip, so you don't want to get heaps and heaps and heaps of kind of imagery. You want to just focus on one thing, pull that out, and write that down. So that was it. And this is the first trial, and I got that. So watch 4 video clips. One was about hippos dancing in a fountain. Bit of water. They're kind of submarines, but it's not really the same thing. The one was a video of birds flying in the sky, and the other one, I can't remember, but it wasn't relevant at all. But the fourth one was this great scene from Star Wars, I don't know if you remember, and Luke Skywalker, of course you remember Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is there with Princess Leia, and they're being chased by the stormtroopers, and you know, the kind of blast doors kind of shut behind them, but they're in this massive crevasse, so you know, got to jump across in the middle of the Death Star, and they can't get across. The stormtroopers are starting to come through, and Leia's kind of fighting them off, and Luke pulls out his little kind of thing out of his Batman utility belt, and he's got a little grappling hook on the end. And it's got these 3 it's like a rotor blades, it's like 3 rotor blades, like helicopter blades, and he takes it and he spins it around like this and he throws it up, and it catches up on something up there, and him and Leia swing across to freedom as the stormtroopers are firing on them. I was absolutely kind of enthralled by this. It was kind of literally kind of chewing off the edge of the table. And it stopped, and I was like, wow, that's great, you know. But then I remembered I was doing an experiment. And then I looked at my notes and I was like, well, rotating helicopter blades, space, well, yeah, Star Wars, more mechanical stuff. It doesn't get much more mechanical than Death Star, spacecraft, space skeletons. I thought, space skeletons. Space skeletons, stormtroopers. If you look at them, they're kind of like a cyber skeleton in the way. They've got these white suits. Probably going out of time. Oh, I'm on time. And I think it's George Lucas's idea of a kind of futuristic skeleton. They've got these white suits and black eyes and a black mouth. So this, for me, I mean, obviously, I didn't visualise the Star Wars clip. That would have been astronomically weird. But I did something else. I visualised something which was thematically similar to the Star Wars clip. And I was like, right, so I said that was the clip. So I get my rankings and I put that one number 1. Then I ran the random number generator and that clip came up. Okay? Because they're all numbered, and that clip was the one that the computer, the random number generator, chose as the target. So that was the first trial. I did 20 trials like that, which took all day, and long and short of it is, I got some significant results. By sum of ranks, if you know what that is, you add up all the ranks and you do an analysis on that. That was significant. I got 8 direct hits, so out of 20 we get 5 by chance, but I had lots of second place hits as well, so that was my second place target. So I wasn't completely 100% successful, but it was significantly deviant, you know, probabilistically speaking. Anyway.
Significantly deviant with this one?
Well, yeah, in a different way. So, if you're into these stats, that's kind of all right. Obviously, this is just one experiment with one person and he's replicating, but I think it's promising. And it's a good methodology. It has its advantages. I won't go into it, but there are numerous advantages to this kind of research. But first person, participant, experimental research, it has ethical advantages for one thing. You don't have to give anybody any drugs. People are motivated. They know the protocol. You know you're not going to cheat. What's the point? Not that you can in precognition design because it's completely secure. So it has numerous advantages, and I think it possibility of a way of doing this kind of research, psychedelic precognition. I'll leave it there. If anyone who wants to replicate this, I think I'll happily give you all the materials. So that's it, and I'm out of time. We don't have time for questions. I'll go on.
Okay, so Dean Riggin has a bunch of side experiments online, and I spent a week with him talking about kind of like basically ways to combine what he's doing with some of this other theory. And I think he'd be totally into the idea of people taking psychedelics somewhere else and doing his experiments online and just kind of combining forces that way.
That's a really good idea.
So
I
it
know
would be really
Dean.
easy to do.
I know Dean, he's into the idea of people doing psychedelic psi research,
Yep.
and I think it's a good way forward. And that would be a very good way of doing it, because you have an online ESP task, and then people can just be doing it in their own state. They can communicate in what it is, what state they're in, what substances they've taken. That'd be a really excellent way to do some kind of field research, and not have to go through all the massive hoops you have to jump through to kind of actually administer psychedelic substances to people. Which for parapsychology you can't attract that kind of funding, anyway. So that's a great idea.